Hello, and welcome to today's media briefing on the new report, Help Wanted, Diversity in Clean Energy Jobs, from a sterling group of organizations, including E2, Environmental Entrepreneurs, the Alliance to Save Energy, American Association of Blacks in Energy, Black Owners of Solar Services, and Energy Efficiency for All. My name is Ben Finzel. I am president of Renew PR, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of working with E2, one of the report partners, on communications. I'll be the moderator for today's conversation, and today's conversation is being recorded and is on the record. Today's agenda includes an overview of the report, insight and perspective from 3 of our report partners, and 2 different Q&A opportunities. You're welcome to start putting your questions in the chat box now if you like, or you can wait for the Q&A to begin after our presentations. We're joined today by senior leaders from 3 of our report partners, including Alliance to Save Energy President Paula Glover, BOSS board member and chair of the policy committee, Nicole Sitaraman, and E2 executive director, Bob Keefe. We'll hear from each of them individually shortly. But first, we want to jump into the data in the report to ensure you all have a good understanding of what's included and how it was developed. We've asked Phil Jordan, vice president of BW Research, to discuss the report methodology. BW Research developed the data in the report, and we thank them for their work on this project. Phil, over to you.
Terrific. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here and really excited to be working on this, what we think is a really groundbreaking report that we hope you'll find very useful. I'm just going to take a minute or two to go over sort of in broad themes, the methodology for the report so that you understand where the data came from and really spend a little bit of time highlighting some of the important information on that methodology about how we approach the demographic information in its collection and its reporting. So the report relies on really supplemental and deep dive analysis of a number of data sources, but most prominently the 2021 US Energy and Employment Report, which is from the Department of Energy, as well as the 2020 Use or Wage Report that was produced by the Energy Futures Initiative, the National Association of State Energy Officials, data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and of course, E2's Clean Jobs America. To give you a sense about the US Energy and Employment Report, it's the most comprehensive assessment of energy employment data available. It's based on a survey of between 30 and 50,000 businesses each year across all 50 states. The survey covers a wide range of energy technologies. It addresses job estimates and growth, and it includes direct data collection on demographics of workers in the energy sector. Now, demographic data collection is challenging. And for demographic racial groups, we use the report uses the terminology that is the same as the federal government and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So essentially the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Census Bureau, which are required to collect that data for white, Black or African American, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. So those are the categories as prescribed by the federal categories, and that's the terminology that we use for this report to remain consistent with those public data sources. The data are based on self-identification, and so it's important to note that racial categories generally reflect a social definition of race as used in this country, but we're not defining race in any way. And we make note of that in the methodology in the report that you can find right up front. We also wanted to note, we thought it was important that, particularly because we're dealing with, largely dealing with employer surveys here, there are information on very critical diversity elements that are not included in the report. So despite the fact that we would like to examine as much of the overall diversity of the clean energy sector as possible, the representation of people with disabilities, the LGBTQ+ community, religious minorities, immigrants, young people, old people, etc. There are significant challenges to collecting data, especially when we are thinking about an employer reporting on their employees when that information may be unknown or not being identified. So because we're using the available data, we don't have any information on findings for those groups, though we recognize the critical importance of digging deeper in the future to make sure that we are capturing a broader swath of activities and diversity. So again, in summary, pretty comprehensive effort with, as I mentioned, 30 to 50,000 completions, as well as significant data from public sources, including U.S. Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, to generate the estimates. Again, with a recognition that demographics and how people identify within the different categories that are selected and used by the federal agencies can create a little bit of imprecision, but certainly we held to a standard that we believe is highly consistent with both the categories and the level of accuracy that our federal statistical agencies would employ. So I think with that, I'll sort of leave the methodology question alone, and happy to take any questions that folks have about methodology, and then the hopes that we can dig into the meat of the work, which is the really critical findings and next steps.
Great, Phil, thanks so much for giving us an understanding of the all-important data, which is really the foundation of this report. And thanks to you and your team for pulling it all together. Sounds like a lot of work. So next, we're going to open the conversation up to questions for Phil on the report methodology and the data. If there's anything you'd like him to say again, or anything you want to clarify, particularly as it relates to the census, because sometimes that can be a little bit confusing, or maybe that's just me. So this is your chance to do that. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat box. You can raise your hand. You can send a note in the Q&A section and let us know that you'd like us to call on you directly. Any of those methods will work. So there's a whole bunch of you logged in. Anybody have questions for Phil before we move on? Happy to take those now. While we're waiting, Phil, I'll just ask you one. What's the precedent for this report? So have there been other efforts to look at this kind of data, and how does the work you did differ from any of those, if there have been?
So I think there has been a lot of interest. There are always challenges in terms of either sort of sensitivities or other sort of issues about how deeply organizations or government agencies are willing to tread into some of these questions. As we learned, right, as we were trying to answer a lot of the questions that are out there, a lot of the categories, while they are what we use and they might make the best sense of what we can put together, which is arguable, meaning what the federal statistical agencies use, there are a lot of people who don't identify that way. So it can be really challenging. So it requires a lot of thoughtful and deep analysis to really get into it. So I would say that there has been interest, there have been efforts. I think this goes a step beyond that. In really, first of all, highlighting the key element of clean energy and how it's defined by E2 and its partners and friends in many states across the country, which is really what are the new opportunities that are emerging from decarbonization. So where is the job growth going to be? So really honing in on that to make sure that we get that dialed in and right, to understand where the blind spots are, where the challenges are, where there's underrepresentation, and where we need to focus our efforts to make sure that we're building a more equitable future. So that's one key, I think, differentiator. And then the other is just digging a little bit deeper on understanding those areas that where the federal categories may leave some folks out. And so so I would say it's just sort of a deeper and more thoughtful analysis of what's been done. So it's pretty exciting.
Good. Thank you for that. I think that's really helpful. So last chance for questions for Phil before we move on to our presentations from our panelists. I don't see anything in the chat or in the Q&A. Oh, no, we have one question, which I almost missed, from Corinne Reeves at S&P Global. Can you please give me your definition of clean energy and what's included? You sort of touched on that just now, but your definition of clean energy and what's included for the purposes of this report.
Sure. So we maintained obviously a consistent definition with E2's Clean Jobs America report. So broadly speaking, we're looking at renewable energy generation and fuels, energy efficiency, grid modernization and advanced grid technologies, advanced transportation, which includes electrification and the infrastructure that goes along with it, and energy efficiency, which includes electrification.
Good, thank you. Corinne, if you need follow-up, just stick it in the chat and we will make sure that we get to that in the next Q&A. So I'm going to move on and get to, as Philip was saying, the real meat of this, which is our great presenters. I'm pleased to introduce leaders from 3 of our partner organizations who will share insight and perspective on what this report means and what should happen next. I'm going to share brief introductions now for all 3 of our special guests so that they can simply follow each other without more from me. I'm talking enough already. So I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they will speak. First, we'll hear from Paula Glover, the president of the Alliance to Save Energy. Paula joined the Alliance as president in January of this year from another of our report partner organizations, the American Association of Blacks in Energy, where she was CEO. Paula's more than 25 years of experience in the energy industry includes 15 years at electric and natural gas distribution companies. She's a member of the National Petroleum Council and serves on the boards of the Keystone Center and Groundswell. So in other words, she's a rock star. Then we'll hear from Nicole Sitaraman. Nicole is a board member and chair of the policy committee at BOSS, Black Owners of Solar Services. She is also vice president of strategic engagement at Sustainable Capital Advisors here in DC. She's an attorney and policy strategist with a diverse background in energy and environmental policy that includes a role as senior manager of public policy at Sunrun Incorporated and an assistant People's Counsel in the Office of the People's Counsel for the District of Columbia. She's a member of multiple other boards, including Solar United Neighbors, and is also a member of partner organization, American Association of Blacks in Energy. Another rock star. Full panel today. And our final speaker is Bob Keith, Executive Director of E2, where he manages E2's work across the country and coordinates staff and chapters from coast to coast. Prior to joining E2 in 2011, 10 years ago, congratulations, Bob. Bob spent more than 20 years as a political, business, and environmental journalist at outlets including the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Cox Newspapers, Cox News Service, the Austin American-Statesman, and the St. Petersburg, Florida Times. Bob co-founded a technology news website and has co-authored or edited several business-related books. So he's no slouch either. We're going to get started, and Paula, you are up first.
Thank you, Ben. So I want to start first by saying thank you to Bob and E2 for taking on this tremendous work. It is not lost on any of us at the Alliance of what is required when you're trying to pull all this data together and paint a really clear and honest picture of where we are. And it is our belief, certainly mine, but on behalf of the association, our belief that if we are going to do better around diversity, we actually have to have know where we are, where are we starting from, so we can plan for where we want to go. So thank you, Bob, and all the partner organizations for doing this. You know, in my opinion, we should be talking about and starting with energy efficiency. And so really appreciate that efficiency is recognized as a clean energy technology, because many times we are forgotten, but we are the largest employer in clean energy with over 2 million. And if we grow efficiency, we will also grow employment opportunities. And so as we think about climate and what we're going to do to adapt and mitigate climate and what's happening to our environment and our communities as a result of climate change, we need to think about how efficiency can play an enormous part in the success and what we want to see happen in our clean energy future. But wrapped up with that is, how are we going to ensure that every single community, household, and small business not only has access, but also opportunity to take advantage of what clean energy can offer and efficiency can offer, but also how are we going to do that in the most equitable way possible? And all of us know that today is when that starts. We've been talking about this, and this new administration for the last year has really focused on equity with their initiatives, which for us at the Alliance is incredibly exciting because we are aligned, and this is something that is a priority for us. But we also believe that it starts with policy. And so it's understanding where you are, how are we going to get there, developing a plan to get there so that we have greater representation, but also what are the right policies that you need in place to make that happen. And so as we start to think about diversity and clean energy, and even diversity very broadly, part of what we need to understand is why we aren't diverse today, so that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past, right? If you don't know your history, you are likely to repeat it. This is not about us lamenting where we are where we are. This is about us now building a strategy and developing a plan to be and do better. And so I am excited because we at the Alliance really do like having partners like E2, like Boss, like Abe, who are also committed to this kind of work, and that we can work alongside of one another. So starting with policy and thinking about the kinds of policies that we need to have in place so that people can participate. That has to do with workforce development. But there may be some other workforce policies that are required. I might suggest that that also may require that we think about our education policies, because workforce and education are absolutely tied together. And what we don't want, right, is 20 years down the line, we're still thinking about workforce when we could be educating a group of young people today so that they are ready in 20 years. And so how do we ensure that those two things happen? But also even more broadly than that, I would say as it relates to energy efficiency, it is also about supplier diversity. Who is hired? Who do we spend our money with? How do we create opportunities in these communities that are disadvantaged and have been left behind? That is not just Black and Latino communities, but I would say Native communities as well. And so I want to put a big asterisk on Native communities because oftentimes when we talk about diversity, we talk about Black, brown, and women, and we forget about our Native communities, and we have to stop doing that. They are, no one likes to be in the oppression Olympics and no one wants to win the gold medal, but I would just say that we do have to really think very seriously about our Native communities. And so in terms of energy efficiency, it's an opportunity for us. For every single household, every single business should be able to adopt energy efficiency. That includes Energy Star appliances. It is the basics: windows, doors, insulation, and it's the fancy stuff: smart meters, combined heat, power, all of that. We want everyone to be able to have access to it, be able to adopt it. But for us at the Alliance, there's one more thing that elevates to the top, and that is access to broadband. The future of energy efficiency is what we describe as active efficiency. It is the connectedness of our devices to the grid that will help create greater resiliency. What we hope will also expand the capacity of our grid. But that success is based on our ability to have access to broadband. And I don't know, how all of you feel about it, but broadband is pretty expensive. So access is not just middle mile broadband, right? Bringing broadband to communities that do not have it currently, that is our urban and our rural, and many of our rural communities, but it is also the price of broadband. Efficient broadband and high-speed broadband is expensive. And so how do we ensure that those things happen at the same time so that as we're thinking about efficiency in the future, again, we do not create a situation where those of us who can afford it, who can afford the technology and can afford the infrastructure, have it in 10 to 20 years, and then we're still trying to figure out how to bring everybody up to that level. So I would just say, efficiency is really looking at all of that, but doing it with an eye to equity and ensuring that our companies and the work that we do is reflective of the communities that we serve. And so I will leave it at that, because that was a mouthful.
I'm following Paula Glover, one of my sheroes, by the way, and always thankful and appreciative for any opportunity to join with Paula and really elevating the urgency and importance of a greater focus on racial equity and inclusion in our energy sector. So my name is Nicole Sitaraman. Thank you so much to everyone involved in this very important project for including BOSS in it and our perspective. As Ben mentioned, I serve on the board of BOSS, Black Owners of Solar Services, and I provide leadership on BOSS's policy committee. I'm also vice president of strategic engagement at a Black-owned financial and research advisory firm called Sustainable Capital Advisors. We are focused on connecting capital to communities for inclusive, sustainable infrastructure projects. Just to give a little background on BOSS, we're a new collective. We're a collective of Black entrepreneurs and professionals in the solar industry. And we were launched last fall after we had a solar equity summit where we invited anyone who was an owner of a solar services organization or company or professional in the solar space, invited a group of African-American professionals to come together to talk about how we can use our collective power in the solar space or solar plus space, whether it's solar plus energy efficiency, solar plus battery storage space, to strategize about how we can amplify our own voices and make sure that African Americans in this space have a bigger piece of the clean energy transition pie moving forward. So our mission is to combine our and leverage our collective power to lead to actionable solutions for sustained access to equitable opportunities in clean energy production, distribution, and storage for Black-owned businesses. So in a nutshell, we're empowering Black-owned businesses in solar and the Black workforce in clean energy to advocate for climate justice and play a bigger role in decarbonization of our economy. In our view, racial equity must be central to all climate and infrastructure policy decisions, which is why we're really pleased to be supporting this report, because the data in this report is coming at a really critical time. And we are hoping that our policymakers, the business community, will use the information, not just put the report on a shelf, but use the information to facilitate a more diverse workforce and diverse leadership in the clean energy space. So the report is coming out right on the heels of two historic publications. The first is the IPCC report that clarified that we are in a moment of code red for humanity when it comes to climate. And we need to implement measures to drastically reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And the second really important publication that just came out was the EPA report titled Climate Change and Social Vulnerability, which highlighted how our, just 2 degrees in change in our global temperature will drastically impact people of color. And really, it went down the list of a variety of factors that African American communities, First Nations, Asian American communities, Latinx communities will be impacted on a local and national level by climate change. So this report, which highlights how we really need to increase our numbers of underserved populations in the clean energy industry, is coming right at the right time. And this report really highlights, gives the numbers in a really digestible fashion, but it shows that diversity it's not a nice to have. It can no longer be treated that way moving forward. It's not an extra, it's something that has to be integral to our clean energy transition. So as the clean energy industry strives to rapidly accelerate deployment of a variety of clean energy resources and electrify America, there's a lot of energy being put towards that. The industry needs to devote the same level of intensity to diversifying its leadership and its workforce. And as was discussed before, we're at a critical moment legislatively. There's a lot of policy being discussed in Washington right now. And this is the time to really make sure that racial equity in the form of funding, investment for enterprises and organizations run by people of color are able to benefit from the policies that will hopefully be passed soon. Thank you.
Well, I guess that leaves me, Ben, huh? All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Paula. And thanks to all the media that took time out of your busy day for this. Really appreciate it. If you don't know E2, we are a national organization of more than 10,000 business leaders, investors, other professionals who work and do business in every state and across the economy, not just clean energy, but every sector of the economy. And we advocate for policies that are good for the economy and for the environment. So some of you may know we've been tracking the growth of clean energy jobs for nearly a decade now. back before doing so was even cool. And you can find out everything we know about clean energy jobs, and probably more than you want to know, at e2.org and e2.org/reports. We've got a lot of data on there broken down by states, sectors, et cetera. And by the way, as kind of a heads up, we've got some pretty unique and interesting research coming out in the next few weeks that will actually show how many people work in clean energy, every single clean energy job in America, broken down by every single district of every member of Congress. You can reach out to Ben or E2 Comms Director Michael Timberlake if you want to be looped in on that release in a few weeks, I think. I think you're going to find some pretty interesting details about the size of the clean energy industry and districts of lawmakers who are actually voting against clean energy in Washington and state houses, as well as some interesting details on those who are most supportive of clean energy. So look for that in a few weeks. But about today's report, I'm going to keep my remarks short so we can get to the Q&A, which is always the most important things of this, as I know. But what we know is this. We know that clean energy has become a huge part of the American economy, and it's only going to get bigger in the years ahead. Today, more than 3 million Americans now work in clean energy all across the country. That's more people, by the way, than there are bankers, lawyers, real estate agents, farmers in this country. It's huge. And it's about 3 times as many people, by the way, that work in the fossil fuel industry. Now, these jobs, clean energy jobs, pay about 25% more than the national median hourly wage. They typically come with better retirement and health benefits than other jobs. And they are the fastest growing jobs in the country. Again, you can find a lot of that info at e2.org. But what we also know now is this. The overwhelming majority of the people who are getting these jobs, who are working in these jobs, are white and they're male. That's got to change. As our report shows, only 8% of clean energy workers are Black. Only 30% are women. Only 17% are Hispanic or Latino. That's well below the representation of people of color and women in the workforce nationally. If this is going to be the fastest growing job sector in America, if we're going to invest as a country into this, and we, by the way, we absolutely positively need to, we need to do it in a way that's more equitable. So right now, the face of clean energy is a face that's predominantly white and male, but we have the chance to make that better. And right now is the time to do it, and we should do it. Building back better means building back more equitably. Congress and state lawmakers, as all of you all know, are debating legislation right now in Washington that promises to substantially expand clean energy and the jobs that come with it, and really transform our economy in a way we haven't seen in a generation or more. This is going to happen through the infrastructure bill. It's going to happen through the spending bill, and it's going to happen through what the Biden administration and Congress are doing across the whole of government. We need to make sure that people of color aren't left behind in this biggest economic transition we've seen in recent history. With the bills that they're considering in Washington right now, they can. Same with what's happening in a lot of our states. So our point in doing this was to point out the importance and the lack of diversity in clean energy at a time when we can actually do something to change that. And thanks to you all for covering this important story and helping us make that point to the lawmakers who will be deciding the future of this industry and really our economy. And so with that, Ben, I'm going to turn it back over to you to take over, right?
Yes. Thank you, Bob and Paula and Nicole. We appreciate the work that all of you did, you and your partners, to develop and publish this report. And as a reminder, it's available online right now at www.e2.org. Let's move on to our second Q&A now. What questions do folks have? I'm looking in the chat box here in the Q&A. I don't see any. As a reminder, you can put your question in the chat box for me to read. You can send me a note in the chat box or the Q&A box and say I should call on you, or you can use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Any one of those works. Another question from Corinne Reeves at S&P Global. A question from Ms. Glover or Ms. Sitaraman. Beyond equity concerns, can you please talk a little bit more about the importance of clean energy companies having workforces that reflect the communities they serve? How can that help grow the sector at this time?
Nicole, I'll start and you that cleanup as I know you do so well, and I never hit all the points. I think really simply, if we want to grow our businesses, no matter what kind of business you have, today's demographics require that you have a diverse workforce if it's going to be sustainable. That's just a fact. That's what the numbers tell us. But beyond that, as companies are trying to grow businesses into communities that they have never been in before, the way that you do that is have people from that community. That's how it makes it a lot easier. It's a lot easier if someone who lives in that community or engages with that community is speaking on your behalf and championing for you as a business, as a company on the work that you do. It allows you to build trust in the community a lot faster. It allows you to understand where there may be some challenges that you may not be able to see directly. Having a workforce that reflects that community that you're trying to operate in is always going to help, I think, the company on the other side be far more successful. And at the end of the day, a business is really looking for financial success and sustainability. We are in a time today where our population under 18 is primarily of color. That is what the future looks like. And so as clean energy or any sector for that matter, if you're planning to be here in another 10, 15, 20 years, and you're not thinking about how you're going to have a workforce that is more diverse, I'm not quite sure what you do, because the students coming in are going to be more diverse. That workforce is going to be far more diverse. And so I think that should be, right, we're beyond it's a nice thing to do. If you're a person who's like, this is about money, this is about money. This is how we find success.
Agreed on all those points. I would just add that we're in a moment in time where we are seeing literally, we saw it with Ida in both the Gulf Coast and in the Mid-Atlantic, right where I am, that there's a phrase, all politics is local. In a sense, climate is hyper local, and the impacts on those communities, they have the greatest insight about their own lived experience, whether it's with respect to the utility, with respect to the electric grid, whatever it may be. People in the communities that are being impacted by climate change are supremely knowledgeable about potential solutions to breakdowns of their electric network. They're super knowledgeable about who's who in their community. They're super knowledgeable about the political process in their community to get things done. So in addition to the economic benefits of focusing on diversifying your workforce through working with the community, there's also just a broader, it just makes sense from a political perspective, and just kind of maximizing the knowledge base that is there in the community for the benefit of our broader clean energy economy and our grid. So it just makes sense to do it that way.
Thank you both. And Phil, I think you wanted to add something?
Actually, I was referring to the new open question that came in. I'd be happy to take a pass.
Okay.
At that, but
So
I don't know if Bob has another comment to make.
So the next question is from Delgar Erdanasana from Inside Clean Energy. Thanks for this discussion. The report noted that nuclear generation is the only slice of the energy industry where Black workers are represented at the same level they are in the overall workforce. And you attributed this in part to utilities' diversity efforts and union presence at utilities. But my understanding is many unions have historically been unwelcoming toward people of color and toward women. Have unions in the energy industry moved past this, or is there still work to do?
So I'd be happy to take a first crack at this. And I think, the first comment to make is that there are a large number of national labor organizations, and then an enormous number of locals, and that the experiences of members in those unions and the leadership of those labor unions are very different. So I would say that when you look generally speaking, there are a lot of unions that are incredibly diverse. If you think about Unite Here or SEIU or some of the other unions, there's quite a bit of diversity in those unions. And in the construction trades, certainly the laborers unions have done a good job, a really good job, I think, in addressing questions around diversity and inclusion. Of course, there's still work to do. And I would just like to note that there's work for all of us to do in this space, because labor unions alone cannot erase hundreds of years of segregation and systemic racism, underrepresentation, underinvestment. Pick whatever term you want to use, right? A labor union alone can't solve that. Many labor unions are working really hard to diversify their ranks. More work needs to be done. I think the labor unions that we've worked with and spoken with are ready and willing and excited to be doing that work and are starting to do that work. I think that they can be a really important partner in sort of ensuring both increased diversity in the sector and also ensuring that there are fair wages paid. I don't want to sort of diminish the experiences of those who have reported the sentiments expressed in the question, right, in terms of inclusion. But I do think that this is a sort of a nuanced question where there are certainly labor unions that are providing some examples of how to address this appropriately, that there's a lot of interest and effort in this space, but absolutely still significant work to do, and not just to put that at the feet of the labor unions, but it's a collective effort to make that happen.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
Hey, Ben, I'll just add real quick, if I could, put some scope on this. Yes, this is an incredibly important question. And yes, it's important to look at the nuclear industry, but also look across the rest of the energy industry. Phil probably knows these numbers off the top of his head better than me, but I think about 61,000 people work in nuclear fuels and generation around the country. That's a lot of people. But for perspective, 350,000 or so work in solar, 114,000 work in wind, and as Paula mentioned earlier, about 2 million work in energy efficiency. Yes, we need to tackle the diversity issue in every single one of these sectors. And we need to look closely at the biggest of those sectors too.
Thank you, Bob. Paula or Nicole, before I move on. Okay, so policy. Obviously, policy is important. We've talked a bit about it today. And as Bob noted, building back better must mean building back diverse. Several of you have mentioned this already, but let's underline it. What should Congress be thinking about in the infrastructure bill conversations about making the clean energy industry more diverse?
Paula or Nicole, you guys want to start, or you want?
I'd be happy to just kick it off.
Great.
We talked about this in our policy brief, which we released on Juneteenth. But essentially, we're following the money, in short, and we want to see that minority-owned businesses receive funding, whether it's through the Justice 40 kind of initiative that we're hoping will be codified in the legislations that are being considered and voted on. But in some form or fashion, Congress needs to ensure in black and white that minority-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses are able to access the capital, the money that is being provided through these bills. And also, we're looking for on the more the regulatory side, once the bills are passed and move forward for implementation, that enterprises of color are able to kind of navigate the regulatory process to access that money, and are able to be in, position to get access to the contracts and basically the deals, so that they can provide these services, clean energy services, to their community, and not be kind of bogged down by kind of a whole bunch of unnecessary, red tape, paperwork, redundant requirements to even get in the door to get access to that money. So we're very focused on capital, access to capital, and the policies that come out of certainly the current version of the American Jobs Plan and the reconciliation package. They need to have language prioritizing that.
Thank you. Paula, do you want to add anything, or Bob?
Sure. Well, I'll just mention that for us at the Alliance, we're really thinking about the policies that we advocate and how diversity and equity should fit into those policies. So I'll give you 3 examples. We have the Main Street Efficiency Act, which was sponsored by Congressman Welch from Vermont and Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada. And that Main Street Efficiency Act is really a small business grant program where DOE would give grant monies to utilities and others who offer demand side management programs for small businesses, really with the intent to help lower the amount of costs that small businesses have to make on upfront to adopt efficiency. But this bill we're aligned with Justice 40. So 40% of those funds have to be used with minority businesses. So, it's how do you think about existing policies, but make sure that that money a portion is directed towards those communities that are important to you. Main Street does that. Open Back Better, which is really focused on public fund efficiency of public buildings, also has a 40% requirement for diverse and minority communities. We're really supportive of Blue Collar to Green Collar, which is focused on workforce development. And again, making sure that underrepresented people get the kind of workforce training that they need so they can fully participate. And then for us at the Alliance, we're also thinking about legislation around National Climate Bank. And how do we make sure that some of that money is completely focused on those communities? And so as you think about policy, to Nicole's point, it's important to be specific about what you're looking for and how you want it spent and why you want it spent that way, so that when we're measuring the results of these investments, we're getting what we expect. And if we're not, then we need to revisit that policy in the short term, not wait 20, 30 years and then look back and say, oh, we missed the mark. But we should be continually ensuring these are public taxpayer dollars. They are directed towards those right communities, that those communities who are also taxpayers are benefiting from these types of investments in the way that we want them to. And if we're not seeing that, then we need to be going back to our policymakers and recommending the kinds of tweaks that are necessary to see the results that we want to have at the end.
And I'll just point out before Bob speaks, the Main Street Efficiency Act was the subject of an event that the Alliance hosted this morning with Congressman Welch. So contact Paula's media team if you want to know more about that. Bob, back to you.
Well, thanks. And thanks to you both. This is an important question. Yes, and at the core, it's funding. It's the funding that Congress is considering right now in the infrastructure bill and in the spending bill. We need to make sure that members of Congress specifically look to communities of color and opportunities in those communities of color and people of color as they consider where this funding goes. Because again, we can't build back better without building back more diverse and equitably. There's a couple of specific areas, and Paula touched on one of them a little bit earlier, that I think are important. And a lot of these you'll find in the back of our report under the Policy Matters section, of course. But a big one is training. We need to improve the access to training, specifically for communities of color and people of color, to get into this kind of work. I'm always reminded of a woman that we met at E2 up in Chicago, who came out of while she was in high school, trying to figure out what she was going to do for a living, just happened to enroll in a electrical engineering type class offered by her high school. This is a woman who had heard about solar energy, but had no idea what it was, how it worked, never saw it in her community, which is a mainly Hispanic community in Chicago. So she learned about solar energy thanks to this one class in high school. Now she works as a crew leader, I think, for a solar energy company in Chicago. She wouldn't have known about that if it wasn't for one one teacher at one high school in Chicago. We need to make sure that other students beginning at the high school level, but certainly in community colleges and so forth, know more about these opportunities. It's a huge opportunity, as we obviously know. And we need to get them the training to do it through community colleges, through other institutions of learning, through union apprenticeship programs. And as Congress designs the infrastructure and the spending bills right now, they can take steps to make sure that happens. We also need to make sure that money gets to businesses and communities of color in other ways. One way to do that is through the National Clean Energy Accelerator project that's Congress is considering right now, and also through green banks in different states that have worked really well to channel funding to businesses run by people of color, who in turn can hire more people of color to do this work. And then lastly, we need to make sure that communities of color are just in on these discussions. We need to they have to have a better seat at the table. And they have to have a seat at the table before projects go in their neighborhoods, before solar farms or wind farms go on Native American lands, for instance, or in communities of color, before those factories open up to make charging stations, et cetera. And they need to be on those discussions so that those projects can actually benefit the neighborhoods and the people of the communities that they're going in. That's really important, and it's something that needs to be consistently considered with every bit of federal funding that goes out the door.
Thank you, Bob. And I think we would all agree that we're not talking about the kids' table either. We're talking about the main table with all the main dishes.
That's right.
Well, can I say something about the kids' table though?
Sure.
One thing, and I don't know if it'll happen in the kind of twin, bills that are being discussed, but we are strong advocates for K through 12 kind of energy curriculum. At some point, like energy, how our grid works, that needs to be a part of education for children moving up through high school, and having them have that core knowledge. So we welcome kids' input, and we want to see children being prioritized for our clean economy future.
Thank you. Excellent point. We have more questions. So this is again from Delga Erdanasana from Inside Climate News. Maybe a question for Ms. Glover. Energy efficiency is a huge employer, but a lot of energy efficiency programs offered by local governments and utility companies rely heavily on natural gas. Would you call the jobs offered by these kinds of programs truly clean? What do you think of the path forward for energy efficiency in terms of natural gas use versus renewables?
So I think a couple of things that I want to say. One, as an organization, we at the Alliance are actually fuel neutral. Whatever fuel you use, I want you to use it as efficiently as possible. That's really what my focus is. And so to that question, and I don't know that I'm not sure that a lot of energy efficiency programs are only focused on natural gas. But if that's true, okay, we still want people to use less natural gas to heat their homes, to warm their water, for businesses who are using manufacturing, whatever. We want you to be able to use less and still be able to have the same level of output and quality of life that is required. And so, the fight for whether or not natural gas is clean or not is actually not my fight. That's just not where I'm focused. My focus is, if you're using natural gas, are you using it as efficiently as possible? If you're using solar, are you using it as efficiently as possible? Because the thing that we also have to remember for a lot of communities is that in addition to wanting it to be clean, these are communities that suffer from severe energy burden and energy insecurity. They're already spending more than white households on their energy. And so this is to suggest that because it's a clean resource, then I don't have to be efficient, I think is not true. I still want you to be able to use less to lower the cost of those bills, to lower energy insecurity so that people are not making choices between paying the light bill and buying food or medicine. And efficiency it creates a unique opportunity to deal with all of those problems for these communities.
Anyone else want to chime in before I go to the next question? Okay, next question for Phil or any of the other panelists. The members of NIESCO, my organization, report increasing difficulties finding subcontractors, and especially minority, women, disabled business enterprise subcontractors. As the economy continues to improve, we expect these difficulties to increase. Has the research developed any data on tight subcontractor markets on a regional or state basis?
Yeah, so yes, is the short answer, is that there are significant challenges on the workforce side of things and on finding those subcontractors. That is certainly increasing in difficulty, and it's part of the reason why I said we need systemic solutions for some of these challenges, because the prime contractors, general contractors, can't resolve these also on their own. There are a couple of areas that I just want to touch on that I think are important for at least a medium and long-term play, and then we can sort of very quickly talk about short-term. So I really like the commentary about the K through 12, because that's obviously a longer-term pipeline to make sure we get more people interested into the market, not only to work in the jobs, but to also create businesses and supply the market. The other thing that I would note is that we have a tremendous network currently of minority serving institutions that are four-year institutions, whether they be HBCUs, HSIs, Asian American serving institutions, tribal colleges, et cetera, where they're which I believe are really underutilized in the energy sector. So there are a lot of groups, some affiliated with this report. There's also, CDAC with the HBCUs and others that are really trying to build those networks more closely. And I think that we can really encourage the general contractors, the government agencies and others to leverage those networks so that we get more entrepreneurship, more business creation, more supply chain activity happening from graduates from those institutions. And then, as Bob mentioned, there's also a significant role with our community colleges, because a lot of the vocational training can be coupled with some of the business side training so that we can create not just workers, but entrepreneurs who are starting companies. All of those things are sort of medium and longer term challenges. I would also just sort of recommend for a shorter term, it's not going to resolve the pinch point altogether, but we could really use better information and databases and cataloging of companies to make that awareness and make sure that companies know where to find them, right? Where those general contractors know where to find them. So, we're really strongly encouraging local jurisdictions to help develop, identify and develop and strengthen the MWDBE supplier network, and really facilitate those connections among either for direct contracting or with the general contractors to find those subs. This is a problem that will continue on the workforce component, where when we look at the people who have been impacted by COVID-19, the unemployment rates, African Americans lost more jobs. The jobs have come back more slowly. The rate is now almost double. Unemployment rate for Black Americans is almost double white Americans. We need to recognize that the job losses in the fields where those job losses were, and the people who are still out of work, in many cases are pretty far removed from the work that we're talking about here. And we need better, stronger, longer term, more effective pathways to help people who are coming from totally unrelated fields enter into these markets. So hopefully that those can be two sort of short-term pinch point resolutions, but we're going to need some of these medium and long-term interventions as well.
Thank you. Anyone else want to answer that before I move on? Okay, last question from me. So I know from efforts in my own industry, in the PR industry, to advance DEI efforts, that there is sometimes an excuse, oh, we can't find these workers, we can't find these people. And we've talked a bit today about the challenge of, like, on the subcontractor side, the training and the education. But I think there's also, in every industry, also just ignorance about where to go to look, or an unwillingness to do the work. So I'm wondering, particularly for Nicole and Paula, bring us home here on the reality of, both sides of this coin, right? Not just the training and the policy, but also the efforts that industry need to make to really bring about a diverse workforce, including from people who are already out there looking for work right now today, who have the skills.
You
You're
want to
both
start?
smiling.
You can go first, Nicole. Go ahead.
Yes, heard that many, many times before. And I would just say, the challenge of certainly this pandemic have been really, really devastating for the Black and Latinx workforce. However, there are so many impactful, long-standing organizations that are member-driven organizations or advocacy organizations who have a wealth of information about our really kind of thriving and excelling workforce, set of experts, people who have a great deal of knowledge in all aspects of this energy industry. I mean, ABE is affiliated with I'm a member of ABE. There's, National Society of Black Engineers, there's a national, there's so many different kind of Black workforce groups that can be accessed, who are on the web, who are readily available. They have conferences, they have meetings, they have gatherings. So there really is no excuse, folks, for not building the relationships that you need to build. And at its core, that is what this is about. It's, who's in your life? Who are your friends? Who's in your circle? And are you willing to expand your circle of friends to just build the relationships that we all make in our work to find good candidates for great positions? It really sometimes is that simple.
Paula, bring us home.
I don't even know what else to say, Nicole, for us not to have to go to church right now. But Ben, I think in your question, I think what you really identify, which is the problem, which is the unwillingness to do the work. Right? What is the definition of insanity? To do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So if you do not have a diverse workforce and you want one, and you continue with the same types of hiring practices, looking in the same exact places, and then turn around and say, but I don't have more diverse candidates, that's kind of on you. You're not doing it differently. Phil, in his response to the previous question, listed a whole, in addition to what Nicole has shared, group of universities that have students who are really smart and dynamic and ready. I'm sorry. I have a kid in the energy efficiency workforce who's calling me right now. But our HBCUs, our minority serving institutions, our community colleges, our Black and Latino professional organizations, NSBE, SHIP, Black MBAs,
Yeah.
They all exist, and there are all these different types of networks that you can access. I would also say, if you're looking at college students, in addition to your HBCUs, and you want to go to your majority institutions like your Yales, and I'm saying Yale because Nicole is a Yale graduate. I'm University of Delaware, so I'm going to give a shout out to UD. But we have Black student unions.
Yes.
We have we have sororities and fraternities and all kinds of organizations in these university settings. And so it is about doing the work. I have to do the work when I want a diverse candidate pool for a hire. I have to do the work, and anybody else who's really interested in that really does have to make that kind of effort. And it's going to be a lot of work, because if you've done nothing and know nobody, then your rollway is a lot longer than somebody who's been at it a long time. But I'm going to end where I started, which is that if you want to have a sustainable business in 2030, 2040, 2050 and beyond, you have to do this work today.
That's right. Thank you all so much. I say this every time I host one of these. An hour goes by so quickly. I know this report does not address every single last important element of the story, but I hope it's at least a good starting point for a conversation, for more exploration. Please reach out to us if you'd like to know more, if you want to discuss the report in more detail, or if you want to confirm information or a quote for a story. As I mentioned, you can find the report online at www.e2.org, as well as the websites of all of the partner organizations. You can also contact me or E2's Michael Timberlake to request a copy or to get more information. So that does it for today. Thank you for joining us, and big thanks to our special guests, Paula Glover, Nicole Sitaraman, Bob Keefe, and Phil Jordan for joining us. Be well, everyone, and take care. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.